The start of his presidency. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, usually referred to by his initials JFK, was an American politician who served as the 35th president. Kennedy won the election on November 8, 1960, defeating the Republican nominee Richard Nixon. The Cold War. When Kennedy became president, the Berlin Wall had just been built and the Cold War tensions were about to be at their peak. The Berlin blockade was currently being forced by the USSR, and the US was combating it with the Berlin airlift. The New Frontier. The New Frontier was a slogan used by President John F. Kennedy to describe his goals and policies. Kennedy thought, like the Americans of the frontier of the 19th century, Americans of the 20th century had to rise to new challenges, such as equality and opportunity for all. The USSR's view of JFK. When Kennedy was elected, the USSR saw a young man that they could easily push over and play like a puppet. But to their surprise, JFK stood his ground, and no matter what the USSR would throw at him, Kennedy was able to stimulate the arms race and even the space race, which further angered the USSR. The communism in the U.S. During the late 40s and on to the late 50s, there was a great fear of communism in the U.S. This fear would create McCarthyism. Kennedy would predecess McCarthyism, but was very hard on stopping communism from spreading and would eventually lead to a direct attack against it. NASA. President John F. Kennedy in 1961, amid the space race with the Soviet Union, would set the country firmly on a path to the moon and the next giant leap for human spaceflight. The space race. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy began a dramatic expansion of the U.S. space program and committed the nation to the ambitious goal of landing a man on the moon by the end of the decade. Although the USSR was ahead in 1957, we were able to pull ahead. The Bay of Pigs. Before his inauguration, JFK was briefed on a plan by the CIA developed during the Eisenhower administration to train Cuban exiles for an invasion of communist Cuba. The invasion. On April 17, 1961, the plan was a go. The plan anticipated that Cuban people and the elements of Cuban military would support the invasion. The ultimate goal was to overthrow Castro and establish a non-communist friendly government to the U.S. It failed miserably, and the exiles were captured. Kennedy later claimed responsibility for the event. The assassination. JFK was assassinated on November 22, 1963 at 12:30 p.m. in Dallas, Texas, while riding through the Dealey Plaza. Kennedy was riding along when he was fatally shot by U.S. Marine Lee Harvey Oswald. President Kennedy was pronounced dead about 30 minutes after the shooting. Lee Harvey Oswald. Lee Harvey Oswald was an American former Marine who assassinated JFK on November 22, 1963, and when being transferred between jails, was shot and killed by Jack Ruby. Conclusion. JFK, through his 3 years of president, accomplished many great things like creating Equal Pay Act of 1963 and also averted a nuclear war between the U.S. and USSR, and even was able to pull the U.S. out of a recession. Though he accomplished many things, he was never able to see one of his greatest accomplishments he strived for, the U.S. landing a man on the moon.